Welcome, everyone, to MMA's Q4 webinar about preventing a crisis before it happens. I'm Stephanie Vadalero. I'm the Interim Vice President of MMA, and I'm probably best known for my work at the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, where I worked for many, many years to recruit new participants to boating and fishing. So today we have a fantastic speaker who's an expert in crisis communications. And we really hope you come away from the webinar with some proven strategies for identifying and assessing organizational vulnerabilities, real world insights from high stakes scenarios, award-winning techniques to manage and mitigate crisis, and some actionable guidance you can take home with you and implement at your own companies. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping notes to go over. Joel's going to speak for about 45 minutes. If you have a question while he's talking, go ahead and pop it into the chat. We are going to reserve some time at the end of the webinar to go through your questions in detail and comments. Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Joel Staley. He is the founder and CEO of JCS Communications. Joel is a multilingual communications leader with an award-winning record directing teams in media relations, crisis communications, and brand campaigns across multiple industries in the US and international markets. A 25-year corporate communications veteran, Joel's experience leading teams for the world's largest PR firms in dozens of crisis scenarios, including managing a client's defense against a CBS News 60 Minutes assault. Doesn't that sound fun? The successful effort earned Joel and his team a PRSA Radiance Award for Crisis Communications Campaign of the Year. So Joel teaches best practice tactics and techniques for conducting an organizational vulnerabilities assessment. And he also offers guidance on developing crisis scenario plans that mitigate the discovered vulnerabilities. So with that, I will turn it over to Joel. And if I missed anything there, Joel, feel free to fill in the blanks. You can take it away.
All right. Stephanie, I really appreciate the introduction. 25 years is a long time. It sounds even longer when you hear somebody else say it. But yeah, I love my job. I love working in communications. And I'm really excited to share today with you some principles and some tactics that I think are going to help you to prevent a crisis before it happens. So let's dive right in. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through some slides that I think are going to help us do just that. So one moment as we get that ready. And hopefully by now you are seeing my screen, my title screen. So I'm going to trust that you'll drop a note into the chat if there's problems. But assuming that this is what you need to see, let's prevent a crisis before it happens. So the first thing, and you're going to see this thread of trust throughout every slide and every conversation that we have today that I share, and that is trust. And this, I'm quoting Stephen Covey here. He is the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is a book that's often rated as the best business management manual that you could possibly read. 40 million copies sold. So we're reading from the right stuff here. He says, trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. And as I've said, you're going to see again and again throughout our conversation today, preventing a crisis or managing a crisis is really about preserving trust. So what is a crisis? What's the definition of a crisis? A crisis is a public challenge to an organization's reputation, and that can be on a variety of fronts. It can be a challenge to your reputation when it comes to your financial standing, your reputation in terms of your credibility, your reputation in terms of, it can be physical, it can be your ability to operate, your assets, your share price if you're a publicly traded company, and on and on. Your legal standing, all of these things can be threatened by a crisis. I want to dive right into an example. We've defined a crisis. I want you to really think about a crisis in real life terms. the Tylenol cyanide caplets crisis of 1982. Wow, that's taking us back. That's what we're in 2025. So 43 years ago. It's a long time ago. And I know the technology then was not quite what it is today, but I think the principles that are relative to this particular case study are timeless, and I really want you to understand them. And so I've got a video here. It's about a 7-minute video that we're going to watch, and then afterwards we'll break it down. So be patient with me as we share this video. It's just going to take a little bit of juggling on the slides so that I can do that. So one moment while I pull that up. And you should just see me again, and then we'll see if we can pull the video up. And again, pay close attention to the video. Really, we're going to discuss so much of what is shared in this video here. So hopefully you're seeing the screen for the video now, and I will hit play, and I think you'll enjoy.
Backlash over the ad was immediate.
To rebuild trust, corporations in trouble follow a familiar script.
I am deeply sorry.
This was a major breach of trust.
One written nearly 40 years ago when a deadly crisis gripped America.
The first to buy was the first to die.
Tylenol changed the crisis landscape.
But have all the lessons been learned?
Anger is boiling over on social media with the hashtag.
In 1982, I was 8 years old, and my mom had just gotten back from the maternity ward, went to the grocery store and bought Tylenol from the grocery store that was doctor's orders. And the next thing I knew, I just saw my mom go out on a stretcher from my upstairs window, and that was the last that I saw her.
Mary Reiner's Tylenol had been inexplicably spiked with poison.
3 people are dead, and another is in critical condition tonight.
One of the victims took the pills he bought to his home.
His brother and sister-in-law were so upset by his death that they went back to the house and took some Tylenol from the same bottle.
As the death toll hit 7, the terrifying randomness of the poisonings shocked the nation.
That bizarre mystery of Tylenol laced with cyanide still has not been solved tonight.
Investigators say they are searching for, quote, a madman.
People were terrorized. They didn't know what product they had in their home that could possibly be lethal if they ingested it.
Scared, really, that somebody could have tampered with some of the other products.
We had police riding around with their bullhorns, yelling, "Throw out your Tylenol, flush it down the toilet."
Do not take any Tylenol until further notice.
People were checking themselves into the ER, thinking they'd been poisoned.
I was just nervous for the baby.
It was absolute chaos.
Flush it all down the commode, okay?
There's no single person, or even a group of single persons that stand out above the rest at this point in time.
We had no clues as to the motivation except the taking of human life. It made no sense. There was no clear and intended victim, but just anyone who happened to have the misfortune to buy a bottle of Tylenol.
Police are looking for disgruntled employees, angry customers, anybody with a grudge against the stores or Tylenol. Police are even checking stock transactions to see whether someone was trying to push down the value of Johnson & Johnson stock.
This was not a cockroach in a box kind of an issue. People had lost their lives. And that really created that vulnerability, that sense of risk, that sense of threat that I think really scared a lot of people, and justifiably.
Alan Hilberg worked for Johnson & Johnson's outside public relations firm, one that was increasingly focused on a new type of business, crisis management.
I remember asking lots of questions. The conversation was, well, we need to recall. Okay, do we recall from the store? Do we recall from the city? Do we recall from the region?
All the bottles of extra-strength capsules were removed Friday as part of the nationwide recall.
Now, not only is extra-strength Tylenol off the shelves, Tylenol commercials are off the air.
The race is on for Tylenol's competitors.
They didn't worry about the money. They didn't worry about the impact on the company. They stopped shipment, ordered all their distribution chain to pull it back in so that we could figure out what was going on. And that sticks out in my mind. It was not a negotiation or discussion. In fact, they stepped forward and volunteered it.
Some analysts predict the Tylenol brand name will disappear within a year.
We concluded we were never going to be judged by what caused the problem. We were always going to be judged on how we responded to it.
Meanwhile, the criminal investigation seemed stuck in first gear.
The 130-man, multi-million-dollar investigation, according to sources, hasn't lifted a promising fingerprint.
We did receive hundreds, indeed thousands of tips, and would investigate and run down every single one of those tips.
A stolen car with Tylenol in it, the body of a man found with Tylenol in a coat pocket. The reports of a Tylenol shoplifter.
We got there, we said, now where did you get this information? And she says, I have a magic pen, and it made me write these things out, and I've told you about it.
Hundreds of leads to the cyanide killer, but most of them bum and bizarre.
Then there was a new development, an extortion letter threatening to do it again.
Authorities today stepped up their search for the man accused of demanding $1 million from the makers of Tylenol to prevent further murders.
The extortion letter, when received, was an obvious point of interest to the law enforcement authorities.
James Lewis is said to have made that demand.
He maintained as many as 20 aliases and described himself variously as a salesman, computer specialist, importer, and freelance writer.
We were trying to determine whether or not the person that sent the letter was indeed the one that had put the cyanide in all the capsules, or whether it was just some lookalike or screwball taking advantage.
Common sense would tell you this is an important thing that we are looking at.
As the police searched for Lewis, Johnson & Johnson grappled with a $100 million recall and the future of one of its most lucrative brands.
The question became, how do we regain trust? It wasn't in the efficacy of the medicine. Tylenol works. Trust was lost in the packaging because the packaging had enabled the poison, the cyanide, to be entered into the medicine.
6 weeks to the day since the Tylenol murder story broke, Johnson & Johnson held a news conference in New York to reintroduce Tylenol.
Tylenol capsules. It had the cotton ball, it had aluminum over the top, it had a childproof cap, it had plastic over the childproof cap. Those levels of safety became the levels of trust.
I think they're going the extra mile to make it sure that it's consumer safe.
Tylenol, the so-called 8th victim of this tragedy, is continuing to recover.
The business turnaround, one analyst calls the greatest comeback since Lazarus.
Packaging now had become a competitive advantage. Everything from food products to pharmaceuticals were favorably affected.
If I take the cap off the milk carton, you have to stick your finger in there and grab the ring and pull the ring out along with the seal. I think of Tylenol, still to this day.
Today, although crisis management has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, Hilberg says many companies seem to miss an important lesson. Come clean with the public right away.
We're seeing too many examples of companies, whether it's Volkswagen or Wells Fargo or Equifax, where situations actually exacerbate simply because they forgot the lesson that you're going to not be judged by what caused the crisis, but by how you respond.
Johnson & Johnson has also stumbled since the Tylenol case. In 2010, it faced a public backlash after a series of drug recalls, including one the company conducted without letting regulators or consumers know.
Mr. Chairman, I know that we let the public down.
The single most important metric of a company's value is trust. And that's what crises threaten. They threaten trust.
Faced with worldwide outrage over these images showing a passenger forcibly removed from a plane, United Airlines CEO issued his third apology on Tuesday.
You said you were sorry. Where are you going from here? That's how I'm going to judge whether I trust you or not.
Almost 40 years after the Tylenol murders, the case remains unsolved. While Lewis served 12 years in prison for the attempted extortion of Johnson & Johnson, he has long denied any involvement in the tampering, and no one has ever been charged with the deadly crime.
Lewis made himself a suspect because he tried to shake down money with the implication being that he had done it and wouldn't do it again. But we had several other suspects, none of which would answer the question of why. And there was no direct link as to the indiscriminate taking of life.
The investigation continues.
There was no evidence to pin it on anybody at that time, and there still hasn't been any evidence to pin on anyone. So that's where this all stands. It's the perfect crime.
So there's the video. Let me come to back to our slides, if I may. One moment. So as we think of, that's a lot to digest, I know, but let me offer some points that I think will help us do that. So as we take a look at this crisis, this is what I'm seeing. Johnson & Johnson recalled 31 million bottles of Tylenol. I promise you, none of you are sitting in a room, even if it's a warehouse, that could hold 31 million bottles of Tylenol right now. It's a huge undertaking. There was a retail value in 1982 dollars of 100 million. That'd be about 307 million today. So this was not a small issue. It cost Johnson & Johnson, in our terms, $300 million, but they saw that it was well worth it. They went forward. There was no discussion. They volunteered it. Johnson & Johnson offered replacement product in the safer tablet form free of charge immediately. Now, before we defined a crisis as something that could possibly threaten your share price, your financial standing, well, in 1982, this stock was trading just before the crisis at a 52-week high, okay? Once the crisis happened, obviously the stock price fell and panic selling ensued, and the stock price went back and forth. But honestly, within just 2 months, and this is in the record, it recovered to its high, the 52-week high in terms of the share price. Tylenol's market share plunged from 37% to 7% during the crisis. Again, awful. Again, cause for worry. There were experts that were saying the Tylenol brand is never going to recover. It's going to disappear, right? Because of the way they handled it. In just a year's time, the market share had climbed back to 30% and continued to lead all competitors. So what did they do that was so good? What did they do that helped them preserve trust and recover so quickly? And I think it can be encapsulated in the quote that we see here from Alan Hilberg, who was in the video. He said, "We concluded we were never going to be judged by what caused the problem. We were always going to be judged on how we responded to it." And I think he's exactly right. We get caught up so much at times, most of the time, in fact, with the blame game. And that doesn't help preserve trust. We need to show people this is what happened. We need to explain it. And then we need to tell them and explain it to them. This is what we're doing to prevent it from happening again. That's the key. I love this example because in full disclosure here, I previously worked for Burson Marsteller. That was at the beginning of my career. And my career overlapped many of the executives who worked on this particular crisis management issue. And so I learned a lot from them. And this case study, frankly, I think it encapsulates all of the most important principles of crisis management, but it also is, it reminds me of some excellent professionals that I used to work with. So I enjoy sharing this case study. So we touched upon this, but I really want to outline it for you carefully. Their keys to recovery. One, there were no half measures. They didn't say, well, we've got these caplet bottles and these, gee, it only happened in Chicago. Let's just pull everything in Chicago off the shelves. Or maybe we'll extend that to the state line, Illinois, right? No, they immediately said all product that's coming off the shelves across the nation. As I said before, it's so important to explain, well, they didn't defend. They didn't get caught up in saying, it's not our fault. It wasn't us. They simply explained, this is what happened. This is what we're doing to prevent it from happening again. They focused on what was harming trust. And in this case, the video claimed it, said it very clearly. It wasn't the medication. The medication worked. Tylenol, could help you with your headache or your aches and pains. The problem was this nut job was able to get a bottle, open it up, tamper with it, and then put it back on the shelf without anyone knowing. Johnson & Johnson turned its weakness, the packaging, into a strength. They became the pioneer of tamper-resistant packaging. Now, sorry, I'm going to date myself here, but I was in middle school when this particular situation happened. And let me tell you, yes, it caught the attention of everyone, and everyone was scared. But something that I remember is that before this time, when you bought medication or vitamins from the store, you brought them home, you unscrewed the cap, and there it was. There was nothing between, the cap and the medication or the vitamins themselves. The same with all of your food products. I didn't know what tamper-proof packaging was until Tylenol happened. Afterwards, as I've stated here, Johnson & Johnson, they became the gold standard in tamper-proof packaging. They restored trust in the public in their product. They did what it took. And in fact, they were so successful at it that everybody else, in order to comply with this new standard that Tylenol had created, they had to also employ these same packaging measures, or risk the public not trusting them and their products. So it's very instructional, this whole case study. Now, here's the question. We don't want to live through a crisis. We want to prevent a crisis. We don't want to become the next Tylenol. We want to see it before it happens and stop it. So how do you recognize an issue that has the potential to become a crisis? I think the first step is for you, whether you're the CMO, VP of corporate communications, your role, I think the first thing that you do is you search for vulnerabilities. And the way that you do that is this. This is what I've learned in public relations. We, in our organizations, think things are great, but that's not the way an investigative journalist would see it if they were allowed complete access to all of your operations and everything that you're doing in your organization. So if you're going to be effective at searching for vulnerabilities, you need to put on those lenses as you look. Pretend you are an investigative journalist and then take a look at what's going on. So first, I recommend conducting an organizational and industry-wide traditional news and social media audit, right? As you look at all of the media coverage, look for trends and patterns. Is there any incorrect messaging that's popping up repeatedly? Are there any misperceptions that seem to be forming as you look over that time period? And again, in the media coverage. And this includes social media too, right? If there's been any negative coverage, was it just a one and done, or do you see it slowly start to repeat itself in the other reports that come later? Are there any audiences or stakeholders that are unduly effective, or excuse me, unduly affected, right? So is there one particular type of customer that's yours that's getting beat up with this trend that's going on? Are there any classic story elements involved here in what's going on? And remember, you're thinking like an investigative reporter. They have to come up with a story that sells, right? I mean, yes, they're supposed to be journalists, but in the end, they want clicks, they want views, they want repeat visitations to their websites, right? And so they're looking for things that sell, and good stories sell. And so they're looking for somebody who is a victim, someone who's a hero, a villain. Is there some sort of David and Goliath comparison that could be made here? A really big, large corporate entity with deep pockets, and little old mom and pop on the corner here who don't have any money and are retired on a fixed income, right? Is there some sort of perceived exploitation of the vulnerable, or could it be made to seem like there is? These are the story elements that reporters look for. It's what you should be looking for too as you assess your own operations. Is there a pattern of biased treatment of protected classes? Is there any legal action or lawsuits? If so, why? And is there any trend to those lawsuits? Is there a risk of other law firms jumping in on this? All of these are questions that you can use to guide yourself as you conduct a vulnerabilities assessment. I recommend that you talk with your legal counsel. In my experience and in my career, I've always made it a point to have a very good relationship with legal counsel, and there's a very specific reason for that. They know all the dirt. They know where the bodies are buried. If you don't want to be blindsided by what they know, you need to have a good relationship with them, and you need to get them to trust you enough to share with you what they know. Review your operations, and I don't mean from afar or remotely. I mean burn some shoe leather. Get out there and walk the plant, walk the factory floor. Wherever you have facilities, be familiar, personally familiar with those facilities, and see what's going on there. Take those reporters' eyes to those locations and see what you can see. Check with industry association leadership. Now, fortunately, you have a great relationship with that industry association because you're on one of their webinars today, but they have great resources. They also have a view on a national level of trends and things that are going on. They have contact with other members of your industry, and they know what some of their challenges might be. They also may be able to share with you information or best practices that could help. So make sure that as you're doing a vulnerabilities assessment, you check with them. Review your suppliers and vendors. Nike, several years ago, learned the hard way that this counts. They were accused of making their shoes in the Asia Pacific region of the world in sweatshops that exploited child labor. And it wasn't enough for them to say, hey, that's not us. These are the people making our shoes. Well, that was an inherent part of their business model. They had farmed the labor out very cheaply to these sweatshops in the Asia Pacific region. And that's what allowed them to sell high quality shoes at a very reasonable price. Well, you need to be responsible for the reputation of your suppliers and vendors. You can't necessarily control what people do or don't do, but you need to be aware of how they practice business. You need to be aware of their methodologies in manufacturing, if they're supplying parts for you or raw materials to you. And you need to be aware of any reputational vulnerabilities that they may have. All right, so you've done your vulnerabilities assessment. Now you need to review it carefully, and you need to select issues that you found that have the most potential to become a crisis. And there's a big spectrum of these, right? On one side of the spectrum, you're going to find a lot of things that are actually pretty likely to happen, but you don't think it's going to be a big deal if they do happen. And on the other side of the spectrum are things that are probably not going to happen, but if they did, it would be an incredibly damaging impact to your organization. So you need to look at the spectrum of those and need to pick those, the intersection between likely and damaging, and choose the ones that you think are most apropos for your organization. I typically, when I help clients do this, choose about 4 or 5. I write up a detailed scenario for each issue. And when I say scenario, I mean it's a narrative. All right, if this issue were to pop up, how would it likely pop up? Okay, and I'm writing a narrative that describes each step along the way. It would likely happen when a regulator reviewed our facility and didn't pass us, didn't certify us. And that would be public record. And so then the next step would be a reporter might find out about it, since it would be a public record, and might start to do a story on it. And then if that story would likely be part of it would be a request for an interview. They might call and our company and say, hey, we understand you failed this test with this regulator, and we're going to need to interview you about, why you failed. So all of that detail should be in this scenario, right? Other things that should be in the scenario include the identity of the leaders that are to be on the crisis team. Don't wait until a crisis happens to figure that out. Take those 4 or 5 potential crises that you've identified in your vulnerabilities assessment and say, all right, for each one of these, who should be on the crisis team? And it's going to be different people for each crisis, because if it's an operational issue, you need operational leaders. If it's a financial issue, there's something wrong with the share price or your debt, or you've had issues with your loan being traded at a lower value or something like that, then obviously that's your CFO needs to be involved. His financial team, and so on and so forth, right? The key to weathering a crisis well is when it first happens, getting the right people in the room within 24 hours so that decisions can start to be immediately made. And this can help you do that. Identify the crisis team ahead of time. Identify the stakeholders that might be affected. So this is more than just your employees and your customers. Your stakeholders could be the residences that surround the facility, the plant, or the factory, or the warehouse where you have your operations. If there should be an explosion there, or if there should be some sort of an active shooter incident on site, then they're going to be affected, and you need to be able to have contact with them so that you can communicate to them. Typically, what I do after I've identified stakeholders is I create a stakeholder roster or matrix, where I use a spreadsheet and I populate that spreadsheet with all of the potential stakeholders. I include a contact person, their contact information, and I also put the owner of that relationship, because it might not be the CMO or the vice president of communications. They may not have much to do with that particular stakeholder. There's somebody else within the organization that owns that relationship, so they should be on the spreadsheet too. All of these things matter and will help you in the moment of a crisis. You don't want to have to figure these things out in a crisis. During a crisis, you've got so many things that you have to do. And I promise you, your emotions are heightened, and there's a sense of urgency. a sense of almost panic. And that can cloud your thinking. You think much better, much more clearly in planning phases rather than in the actual crisis phase. In addition to these issues, your detailed scenario should include messaging. Now, there's key messaging. That's the messaging. Those are the messages that we want to diffuse, disseminate, to share, no matter what somebody asks us. Those are the good messages, the positive messages. But there's also the reactive Q&A. A reactive question and answer is it's a sheet that has all of the questions you don't want to answer on it, but you probably will get asked. And there are, for each one of those tough questions, answers that you've used the key messages to formulate. And so you're prepared, even if you're asked questions you don't want to answer. And now, if nobody asks these questions, you're certainly not going to volunteer that information, but you need to be prepared with a solid answer in case. A standby statement. Many times when there's a crisis, we get the right team together in the room within 24 hours, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do and the decisions that are going to be made. You need to issue a standby statement to the media. It doesn't have to include all the information. You don't know all the information yet, but you need to reassure your stakeholders, your target audiences, and the media that you're on it, that you're assessing, that you're investigating, and that you're going to have information soon. So that's often what's included in a standby statement. You also want to express sympathy in that standby statement for those that are negatively affected. All of these things can be part of, again, this scenario planning that you need to undertake. Finally, once you have these scenario plans written out with detailed narratives, conduct a crisis scenario tabletop simulation with your crisis team per scenario. And how do you do that? You need to build into the narrative specific junctures where members of your crisis team might have to interact with a government regulator, a news reporter, the leader of a stakeholder group. And so you would simulate those interactions by yourself or maybe another team member, marketing team or communications team member that might call in or that might visit the room and act as that person and interview. And there again, the person who's acting as a spokesperson that's among your crisis team would need to have those key messages and be familiar with them. They would need to have that Q&A in case they get asked tough questions. They'd know how to answer them. So all of this is part of what should be a very vigorous, rigorous crisis scenario tabletop simulation. I want to cover messaging during a crisis. I think that a lot of people worry and fuss over, oh my gosh, what are we going to say? How can we make this seem right? And that's really not the right approach. It's not about making something seem right. It's about communicating clearly and transparently in a way that allows you to preserve trust. People can forgive you for mistakes. What they don't forgive most times is deception or covering things up or acting irresponsibly or ignoring these things. So focus on being transparent with your messaging. Avoid blaming. Focus on ethos, logos, and pathos to strengthen your message. And what I mean by that is these are Latin terms. They were actually first put together by Aristotle, some 3,000 years ago, right? But in any case, they mean ethos is the credibility, right? Now, before I began speaking to you today, Stephanie was kind enough to describe my background a little bit. Well, I'm grateful for that. That boosted my credibility. Now you guys are like, oh, now we get why he's talking about crisis, because he has the experience. So your message should include an element of ethos or credibility. There should be an element of logos, logic. What you're saying needs to make sense. 1 + 1 needs to equal 2. And then, of course, there's pathos, the emotion of your statement. There needs to be an emotional appeal in your statement. There needs to be an acknowledgement of humanity there. And remember, as you develop these messages, it's about your viewers, your followers, your customers, those affected. It's not about you. Who needs this messaging? Once you've got it put together, your spokespersons obviously do. But there's a whole host of stakeholders that need this messaging. They're getting questions about you. They're having conversations about you with others in the community. And if you want them to be on message with you, then you need to share with them. And so spokespersons, fundraisers, stakeholders and partners, employees need to be empowered with these messages. Now, Are they speaking to the news media? No, of course not. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Are they acting as the corporate spokesperson who's representing the entire company officially on the record? No, of course not. But I promise you, they're having conversations and people are asking them these questions. They need to be equipped to be able to talk about it in a way that's consistent with how the official spokesperson is talking about it. So when a crisis threatens, again, we've talked about preparation a lot. We've talked about in the middle of the crisis, you actually do Y, Z, or what should you do? What are the first steps when an immediate, it's right there in the moment. You're seeing it happen. What are your first steps? Activate your crisis team. Like I said before, get the right people in the room within 24 hours. The team investigates the issue. They determine the threat level. They determine the actions to be taken. And your communications lead should be in that room, counseling them as to what would be best. They need to know who knows what happened, what do they know, when did they know it, and what was their response when they knew it. In other words, what did they do? What was their behavior? What was their action that they took? And the reason that you need to know this is because your senior leadership needs to be able to tell the media when they're talking with them, we took appropriate action as soon as we learned what had happened. And for you to be able to credibly and authentically say that, the crisis team needs to know that within the first 24 hours, right? So that's why these questions are important. These questions are important because these are the questions the media are going to ask you and are going to hold you accountable for. I also recommend working with outside crisis counsel. Get an external perspective on what's happening and on the next steps, and then prepare relevant messaging. This is very difficult to do when you're in a crisis. It can become easy to just have the circle the wagons mentality and become very insular. You need someone part of the team that can see things credibly from an outsider's perspective, that can hold you accountable and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, I know that you want to do this, but look, this is your reaction here. This is not how your stakeholders are going to see this. This is not how they're going to react. You need to take that into consideration. And somebody who is external to your organization is going to be able to do that much easier than you can. And also outside crisis counsel, their experience, they've been through many, many crises, and they're able to recognize patterns. They're able to point out the potholes so that you don't step in them. So again, outside counsel is highly recommended. News media during a crisis. The news media is not the same during a crisis as they are normally. If you're a boat manufacturer or you create products or manufacture products for the marine industry, when you launch a new product, that's a good moment. You want the media out there talking to you. You want to hear all about it, right? And they're usually friendly and they're usually eager to know about your new product. You can just forget that. That's not the footing you're going to be on during a crisis. They're going to be much more aggressive and much more assertive. So, one, tell your story or somebody else will. Review your media policy with all employees. Remind them who the official spokespersons are. Remind them how they're to handle their social media channels and the disclaimers that they need to make on their social channels that they are not the official spokesperson. Make your spokespersons accessible. Don't hide. Even if it's just to give a statement, but don't clam up and don't ignore the media. Media training for spokespersons. Absolutely. This is a must. They're going to be thrust into a situation. They're going to be thrown to the wolves. Okay, let's be honest. Those interviews are going to be hard hitting, and that's not a normal interview. And nobody knows how to do that intuitively. They need training for that. Media monitoring. Set up a system where you can monitor all of the media that's coming in so you can see how the media is reporting on your incident, and you can make adjustments on the fly. Establish a media briefing schedule. What that means is, if this is a very serious and ongoing crisis, you need to let the media know when you're going to be briefing them, whether it's daily, twice daily, weekly, however that happens to be. And there's a great advantage in that. One, you want to be a good communicator and you want to own the story. So to do that, you're going to have to communicate frequently. Two, the media, if they sense that you're not telling the story, they're going to go to other sources, right? Other people are going to start telling your story, and you're not going to like how they tell it. So establish a media briefing schedule so that the media will think, okay, well, let's just wait before we run the story, because today at 5, Acme Corp is going to have their briefing as they've been doing for the last couple of days, and we'll get this information there. So that's why that's important. Be as transparent and as honest as possible. You may not be able to say everything. You may have to say something to the effect of, you know what, I can't talk about that right now. It's under investigation. But then you need to say something like this. But what I can tell you is, and talk about the things that you can share. Focus your messaging on the affected community. Again, you'll see me repeating certain things that are really important. This is one of them. It's about them. It's not about you. Social media during a crisis, very similar. Same rules apply with these exceptions. Be even more responsive. You've got to respond within 24 hours on social media. You can't wait. And in fact, I would counsel you, if possible, to respond within the hour. If there are members of your social media communities that are blowing you up, that are really negative and just machine gunning you with all of these repeat messages, look for ways to move those people offline where you can listen to all of their complaints and they can feel heard. You don't want to air out all of this dirty laundry right there in social media for everybody to see. And in most cases, avoid deleting posts. What do we think about people who delete and hide things? We think they're guilty. We think they're hiding something. So don't do it. The only exception to that would be if there's some sort of inaccurate information in a post. You want to delete that. Otherwise, leave it on there and just add additional posts that clarify or expand upon whatever your communication might be. Now, how do we apply these principles to the marine industry? And I'm assuming that on the call here, we have boat and yacht manufacturers, personal watercraft manufacturers, large marinas, boat clubs, marine product manufacturers and suppliers, and all of the above, okay? I want you to understand something. Most of the time, what moves the needle in terms of a crisis is an accident or something bad that's happened that's been picked up on, right, by the news media or regulators. So I want to outline something that I think is really important for you to understand. I've done some research here. This is the U.S. Coast Guard's annual report on boating accident and incident statistics, right? And if you'll look here, I've listed the top 7 causes of boating accidents. Let's just go through them. Operator inattention, improper lookout, operator inexperience, machinery failure, navigation rules violation, excessive speed, alcohol. Now, as you look at all of these, I'll just share this total. There were 3,887 boating accidents or incidents in 2024. 384 of them involved mechanical or boat failure, which is one of the categories that I've listed here, right? That's 90%. Or excuse me, that's only 10% that was machinery failure. That means at the lowest, it was 90% operator error. Now, if we take a look at machinery failure, 10%, I bet you 99% of that was due to maintenance issues, improper maintenance, or mechanical failure because it was old and parts hadn't been replaced, etc. Right? What does that say in the end? It says in the end, it wasn't your fault. You aren't the cause of this accident or the cause of the problem that you're getting sued for, right? But here's a newsflash. It may not be your fault, but it's still your problem. Remember Tylenol? Their medication was effective and safe. It wasn't the medication. It was some nut that put cyanide in the caplets. That's what created the crisis. Like their PR counsel said, we concluded we were never going to be judged by what caused the problem. We were always going to be judged on how we responded to it. That must be your focus when there's an issue like this. How you respond determines whether customers or other stakeholders still trust you. If they don't trust you, you're done. It won't matter how good the deal. It won't matter what your dealers are offering. It won't matter how deep the discount. They don't want to do business with you. They'll go to a competitor because they don't trust you. So I mentioned that a lot of these issues are kicked off by some sort of a negative article, right? Well, we've got to preserve trust even in the face of a negative article. Here are my tips on how to do that when it comes to media coverage of some sort of accident or some sort of problem with one of your products. Avoid saying no comment. Take any incident involving your product seriously. And you should put that into the messaging or into the comment or into the standby statement that you give the media or that your spokesperson delivers as part of his or her interview. You may not know the outcome of an investigation, and so obviously you don't want to comment on that, but you can say that your product has been certified by the American Boat and Yacht Council or the U.S. Coast Guard. Talk about what you can talk about. There are there are statistics and data points that you can share that would help reassure people that your products are safe. Demonstrate sympathy for anyone who's negatively affected. Right, in the middle of an interview, don't start to cast aspersions upon whether the person was drunk or whether they were operating the boat safely or anything like that. You just be sympathetic for those who have been injured or hurt. Don't blame it on the operator error. Let law enforcement do that. They're going to do it, okay? It's going to come out in the investigation who's at fault. Always commit to cooperate with the authorities. Absolutely, we're providing every resource we can to the authorities. We want to help them conduct a proper and a fair investigation. These are the things that you can include in your interview or your statement. Now, there are things that drive news reports, right? As a crisis communications expert and as a consultant, one of my jobs as I work with clients is to help them anticipate what's the next issue that's going to pop up in the news media about them, right? What's going to drive news coverage? Litigation drives news coverage. And what happens is that it gets filed, it's public, the lawsuit does, it's public, publicly available, it's public record. And so the news media picks up on that and runs the story. Again, I'm going to repeat some counsel here. If this happens and you get a call about litigation that's going on, yes, you want to say, I'm sorry, we can't make comments about ongoing legal issues or litigation. And that's appropriate. People know that. But you want to coordinate closely with legal counsel to understand their legal strategy so that you can make comments that don't interfere with that. You don't want to say no comment. You want to talk about our products are safe. And as I mentioned before, these certifications that you might have. You might want to say our products are, we have thousands and thousands of our products on their market and they're safely enjoyed by our customers. You want to demonstrate sympathy for those negatively affected. Again, avoid blaming. Let the attorneys do that in court. You want to be above that in your dealings with the news media. So we've got about a minute to recap here, and then we're going to dive into some questions. First, as I've said in many of the slides of this presentation, preserve trust. Focus on preserving trust. That will be your key to being able to continue to operate and recover in the future. Be responsive. Tell your story. Don't let other people do it. You own it. Tell your story. Someone else will. The news media wants to tell the story. They're going to find someone who will. They got to feed the beast. So you own your story and tell it in the way that you prefer. You'll be much more successful at persuading people to see your side of things. Don't defend. Just explain. Be honest and transparent. Demonstrate genuine interest and sympathy for those affected. And remember, it's about them. It's not about you. So that concludes our presentation. This is my website. Much of what I've shared with you today can be found there, jcs-communications.com. There's a blog there. It's an extensive number of posts. And again, you can find a lot more detail about how to handle a crisis there. Also, please know that through Catherine and through the MMA, I'm going to provide a digital one-page summary of the presentation today. So you'll be able to have that as a desk reference piece, and hopefully it'll guide you as you start to see these things in your own organizations, and you'll be able to handle them like a pro. Having said that, I'm going to end my slideshow, and we're going to open it up for questions. So Stephanie maybe will be helping me to field those questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joel. That was great, and a lot to think about there, right?
Yeah.
I will say to anyone that has a question, feel free to turn on your mic and speak up, or if you'd rather pop it into the chat, we can do that as well. I put something there, but if somebody else has a question, you can go first.
All right, let's see.
Yeah, I see some typing happening. Here we go.
Good, good.
How do you suggest managing influencers that have gone from brand ambassadors to brand haters? Ooh.
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So I think what's key here is trying to understand, why have they become a hater? What evolved in your relationship there that changed things? See if you can take it back, dial back the clock, and figure out what moment that was where that happened, okay? And why are they haters? What are they hating on? What are those issues? Most of the time, haters have unresolved questions. They have issues. They feel like they're being ignored. They feel like you're overlooking something that's important to them and their audience. And so look for an opportunity to reach out to them offline You don't want to litigate the back and forth and your dirty laundry right there in the social media forum that you're both members of. And talk to them, invite them to come to your organization, your headquarters, and say, hey, let's talk. We're trying to understand why you're upset with us. We want to see if there are some questions that we can answer for you. I know that each situation is very specific, but generally that's where I'd start.
That's great. Thank you. From Brian, who says, this is very accurate information. Thank you. As the other PR agency person on this call, I would say our agency is doing much more online brand reputation management as a part of crisis communications. Can you talk about how crisis work is now very much managing online reputations?
Yeah, absolutely. So we got to remember that the principles are still the same of crisis communications, right? But how we reach people, those channels, they're almost 100% online now. And so when I mention monitoring, you can't just monitor the news media. You've got to monitor all of these social media channels and see what people are commenting. You've got to demonstrate that you're responsive when they post a comment, as quickly as you can, within a reasonable amount of time. And I like posting within the hour, reply, because your audience is watching that post that they made and they're reading it. And if you let too much time elapse, they're going to move on to other things. So responding within that same cycle is important because it allows them to see your response back to them. I think that it's really important in the digital age to control your own channels, right? So you can't control necessarily what the media says. You can manage, you can try to persuade them and you can try to influence them. But take a look at your website. Take a look at your social media channels, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever it is, and think about the messaging that you have there. Make sure that it's consistent. Make sure that it's well thought out, and make sure that it supports your overall strategy and that you're there consistently and powerfully. Think about those types of content that are most powerful. Video and images. If you're just out there making these statements without any video or images to accompany that, you're going to really be penalized by the algorithm. And plus, just on a practical level, that's not, human beings learn, we're visual learners. Don't let anybody kid you. We're all visual learners. And so give people the opportunity to learn that way.
Awesome. Thank you. Wanda has an issue. One of the things that she has had to deal with includes overcoming roadblocks thrown by corporate attorneys who don't want any communications. How do you get the, quote, legal eagles on the same team to address these tough issues?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And there's no easy answer for that. The right answer is over time. I'll share a quick example. Years ago, I was working for Edelman. It's a big global PR firm. And my client was an outpatient surgical clinic. And they were amazing. They were making upwards of $200 million a year in revenue. The type of surgery they were doing was really popular, and they were making money hand over fist, right? And so I always made it a point, and this is where the answer begins, to have a good relationship with legal counsel. While I was representing this client, they had several smaller issues that popped up, legal issues, and I always demonstrated to their general counsel that I listened and that I supported their legal strategy diligently and carefully. I made sure that I was a resource for them. If they said, well, what's the media doing today? I'd put together a special report and serve it up to them on a platter that showed everything that they might want to know about what the media was covering. And I worked over time to develop myself as somebody like, Joel's a good guy. We can trust him. He gets what we're doing as attorneys. And, we like him as a partner. In fact, he's helpful because he goes and researches stuff for us that we need. Now we fast forward to the moment where it really mattered. I get kind of a panic call from the general counsel one day. And the general counsel says, Joel, I was just at a local bar meeting and I was talking to opposing counsel. This was another attorney. It was a friend of his, but it was an attorney who was suing my client. And so I don't know if you know this, but lawyers do that. They chat amongst themselves, even if they're suing each other. They're not enemies. They're just professional, acquaintances. And so his opposing counsel said to him, he said, hey, you need to watch it because my client was interviewed by 60 Minutes and they like you for a story. They're coming after you. And he was like, whoa. He calls me immediately. Thank goodness he did. He says, Joel, this is what's going on. And he and I immediately started assessing the nature of the story and what might be happening. It allowed me to immediately activate the crisis plan. It allowed me to immediately get the right people in the room. It allowed us immediately to set up perimeter fences, tripwires. We immediately realized that this producer was going around to every one of the former employees who had placed their former employer on LinkedIn. It was really easy to find them. So we went out and we started reaching out to all of them and saying, hey, you might get approached. If you do, would you kind of let us know? We had good relationships with all of the people that we approached, even though they were former employees. And it really helped us figure out what that producer was doing and how to track him and to figure out what questions he was asking and what story angles he was pursuing. So anyway, all of that is helpful, but that's a long way of saying you got to start now developing relationships with legal counsel. And over time, you will get to the point where they trust you more.
Yeah. We've got about 2 minutes left, and I have one last question here I'm hoping you can give some brief advice on. Amanda's asking, do you have any advice for those of us who are boat dealers representing a product built by a different company?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand that right. You're talking about a boat dealer, and they represent you have at your dealership. You have multiple different brands of boats. Is that right?
Amanda, are you able to clarify? Yes, correct.
Okay, and so you're wondering, how do you handle that? Well, I think there's car dealerships that do the same thing, right? And so I would say, one, make sure you have a really good relationship with each and every one of those manufacturers' reps, right? Make sure that the channels of communication are open, and if something difficult were to happen, you'd be able to talk to them and work with them. I think you need to focus on the perspective of the customers or potential customers in your area. How do they see you, right? There's a dealership up the road. They sell Nautiques and they sell Regal. They sell both. So which are they? How does the customer see that? You need to have a good grasp on that. It's difficult for me to give good advice because I don't know what issue you might be challenged with or faced with. Okay, here we go more. Oops, excuse me. Let me turn off alarm. Okay, so I'm reading here. When manufacturers ignore clients' complaints or warranty claims and get frustrated, the dealers get drawn into resolving issues when okay. That is helpful, Amanda. Thank you for adding that in. So,
well, this is actually Staley. This is a separate question, but.
Okay. Oh, I thought it was from Amanda. I'm sorry. What he said. Yeah. Amanda, you have a way with brevity. I love it. Yeah, so that helps me frame this up. So again, and I said this several times in the presentation, it's not about you, it's about them. If you want them to keep coming back as customers, you need to see it from their perspective. Sometimes you might have to take one on the chin, but look at it as an investment, right? If you say, not our problem, we're not helping you. And again, I'm painting this with a broad brush. I know there's a lot of intricacies to handling warranty work at a dealership level. But if you do that, you risk sending them away forever. And not only sending them away forever, but every conversation they have about you is going to be negative. Everything they post online might be negative about you. Think about it. How much is that worth to you? Is it worth $1,000 to handle their warranty issue? A couple thousand? I think that's a good investment. Or show them that you're at least meeting them halfway. Say, hey, look, this isn't our issue. We don't, your product isn't one that we represent, but we're going to meet you halfway here. We're going to do this much for you. And if you can come and meet us and do this much for us. Again, it shows that you're willing to work with them, and it shows that you're not abandoning them as a client. I've had that happen to me before. I had an air conditioner issue go bad, and I kept going back to the same mechanic again and again and again. They weren't fixing it. They weren't fixing it right. And finally, they just said, we're fixing this. Don't come back here. Oh my gosh. Do you think I ever send any business their way? Do you think I ever, said anything nice about them again? I'm still beating them up. I haven't named them. But, you know, and that was 20 years ago. So these things live on in perpetuity. Be careful. It's your reputation. It's trust that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joel, for taking that. We are a couple of minutes over here, so I want to take a pause and thank everyone for joining us today. We're really glad you can make it. Hope you learned something new. When the recording is ready, we will post it on our YouTube channel and send you a link via email. And in that email, there's also going to be a brief survey that we would love it if you could fill out just to help us understand what topics are important to you and how we're doing and how we can make things better. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. We will reach out in the new year to let you know what we've got planned for our next webinar. Thank you again, Joel, and have a great day, everyone.